Haha, they can't blow us up this time. Hooray! They definitely want to kill us. 20XX. This is a game I've been pretty excited to talk about because I've had my Steam account for a very, very long time. Dating all the way back to May 29th, 2009. When I went to a GameStop and bought a physical copy of Portal because, yeah, back then you just had to physically own games to put them on Steam. And you had to have Steam to play your physical games because reasons. My Steam account has been around for a very, very long time, and as such, as someone who enjoys researching games and learning about games and really just discovering every kind of game I possibly can, I have something of a pretty big wish list. At the time of recording, my wish list currently contains 5,289 titles, and if you had sorted the entirety of my Steam wish list by date added, you'd find that 20XX was number 3 on that list, just above Oceanhorn, and just below Rodina. This game has been on my wish list for a long time because it looked so cool and was such an interesting concept, but I just hadn't found a sale cheap enough that I could afford it, but I still wanted to play it. And thanks to a very generous person, I now can. Stop me if you've heard this one before, but the year is 20XX. And everything's on fire. 8 robots that are some sort of prototype new level of robot helper have gone wild, and it's up to 2 or 4, if you have the DLC, robots to try and stop them, all while being berated by their creators and treated like garbage along the way. The plot to 20XX is not a terribly complicated one, and it wears its influences on its sleeve, but I do appreciate just how much it's willing to poke fun at itself and how kind of cynical its humor can be at times. Every once in a while, when you fail, you'll get to see a cutscene where your creators will just completely destroy you and just treat your robots like absolute garbage. And every time you lose, there's a little snarky remark on your little run summary that tells you, like, your robot just wasn't built with a brain or something. It's silly and it's fun. 20XX asks one very simple question. What if Megaman, but roguelike? You start off with 2 robots, Ace and Nina. Nina being the blue robot equipped with a gun that can shoot, Ace being the melee sword wielder. It's very much an X and 0 kind of affair. There are 2 extra characters if you have the DLC. I do not, but they do each have their own different suite of weapons that can be exchanged over the course of any one randomized run. Your character of choice then can run, jump, slide, wall jump, attack, and charge attack their way to victory. Although there is something of a modifiable moveset if you find the right power-ups along the way. This is definitely a game about challenging little hidden extra areas to get the power-ups you need in order to succeed in this randomized sort of Mega Man style environment, and it's a lot of fun. It doesn't seem like there's too much of a difference in damage between the 2 separate characters. It's really just, do you prefer to be up close and personal, or do you prefer attacking things from a distance? Both characters can charge their weapons as well, so it's really just, do you like swords or do you like guns? And one of the most important things about this game is the physics of the platforming are absolutely spot on. Frequently I would find like little tiny platforms that were about as big as my character, and that always makes me worry, because that's a sign it could be a really bad Mega Man style game if you can't comfortably platform on them. But I was having no problems. It just felt like no matter how tiny a platform, I can definitely land on it. I can use that to get where I need to go, and there's absolutely no problems. Once you select your character, you are dropped into a randomized stage. This is kind of a weird choice, because after the initial randomized stage, every stage you go afterwards, you can actually select which one you want to go to. It's just, it picks one at random which you start with, which is a little inconsistent with the rest of the game, but it's not that big a deal. And then you have to run through the stage, destroying enemies, picking up money, which can be exchanged for stuff at shops over the course of a run, as well as a secondary currency that can be exchanged between runs, and has to be, because if you don't use it, you'll actually lose it. So, you know, it's important you spend your money in this game. Hoarding it will do you very little good. There's various chests dotted about every single map, and these chests can contain various upgrades that will passively buff your character's stats, from your basic attack, your speed, your health, and the like. as well as various challenge modes. These challenge modes are kind of underwhelming. In my time playing it, I only ran into like 3 different types. It's either destroy all the enemies in a certain period of time, get to the end without taking damage, or get to the end without a wall of death hitting you, which is basically the same challenge, honestly. I wish there was more of these challenge modes because it's interesting. You are given a choice as to whatever potential upgrade you find on these challenges is worth the hassle of actually getting it, the potential damage you'll take, which will make the rest of your run a lot harder. It's an interesting thing that makes you really stress whether or not it's worth the risk. I do appreciate that kind of risk-reward mentality, especially because you have to make these decisions on the fly, and they have to be relatively quick because the entire stage is actually timed. And if you don't finish it within a certain period of time, you actually get punished for it. And the rewards from these challenge modes are actually pretty interesting. You get new sets of armor, kind of like in Mega Man X, and each one, between your weapon, your feet, your chest plate, and your helmet, will actually change your character's model. There's a bonus for completing each and every set that is unique to every set, of course, and if you happen to invest in a special power between stages, you can actually get a pickup that will allow you to get a bonus if you have a completely rainbow set of armor, which is honestly the most beneficial way to go, I find. I never was in a run where I could actually get a whole singular set of armor, and the fact is, I think that mixing and matching was probably more effective. What with there being like a helmet that gives you more defense if you get health pickups, and then like an armor chest piece that would give you more health drops, which is super useful. Each of the arms really just affects how you charge attack, and I didn't really utilize the charge attacks too much, as well as legs, which are probably the most important power-up of all in your armor sets, because they grant you different abilities, such as an air dash, double jump, hover. There is a lot here to change your moveset on the fly, but only if you're willing to risk your neck for it, and that's really quite fun. There's also hidden stores and checkpoints that allow you to heal up in the middle of the stage, provided you're willing to spend your hard-earned money on them. And this could be the difference between life and death. There's also a store usually just before a boss, and the thing is, it's like the secret hidden ones that tend to have better deals on stuff, whereas the ones on the critical path seem to have higher cost rates for what you're buying, which is interesting. And then you eventually get to the boss. You fight them, and hopefully you win, at which point you can get their weapon, but in an interesting twist on the Mega Man formula, you don't necessarily get it. If you defeat the boss, you'll have the ability to get it, but you can forego this new weapon, which might be beneficial against certain bosses, to trade it in for either money or a randomized power-up that will boost your base stats. This was actually very cool, because as I was playing, I was finding that I wasn't really enjoying the enemies' powers like at all. I think I used every single one of them maybe once, but after I really got into my groove, I was just really trying to get general power-ups for my character because they felt more, in general, just beneficial. Get more energy, get more armor, get attack increases, maybe avoid the speed-ups because you can go too fast and kill yourself pretty easily, but the fact that you can forgo the Robot Master weapon, one of the biggest things in Mega Man, for general upgrades, honestly I preferred it, and I didn't think I would. If you manage to beat the level within a set period of time, you will get an additional bonus as well. And this is something I really liked about this game. It made every moment of the game, even in the simpler stages, really tense. I had to make decisions on the fly, and I had to commit to them pretty quickly because if I ran out of time, that bonus was gone, and the benefits of that bonus could be the difference between victory or defeat. I really liked this. It meant that I had to play a little bit riskier in order to save time here and there, and sometimes I just had to skip a power-up in hopes that the time saved would be enough. Again, it's all risk-reward, but this really did something for me. I loved this whole adding a timer to it. It made it a lot more stressful, but it affected the gameplay in a way that made it a lot more fun. Once you grab all your rewards and get a snarky remark from your creators, you then have the ability to go and select your next stage, which brings it all to a head in what Mega Man games are all about, all the way back to the original arcade Mega Man game, and that is choice and customization. You are always allowed to have choice in this game, just like any other really good Mega Man game, in regards to how you approach each stage, what you're going to go after, the detours you want to take, as well as the stages you want to go through. You're only allowed 3, however. You don't have full access to all the other stages, and it's kind of randomized which ones you get, but you make your choice, and hopefully the next randomized stage is real nice to you. Once your run is over, you are then plopped back to the main hub, and you have to make some other important decisions. First of all, do you go and pet the cat? You should definitely go and pet the cat. But also, Now you've got a bunch of currency to spend. Do you spend that on permanent upgrades for your character? Do you unlock new features, such as said cat showing up in stages to give you more power-ups all across your playthrough? You should do that, by the way, it's awesome. You have to consider unlocking new potential upgrades for every next run. Do you want to unlock new features and new power-ups that will help every run after this? Or do you want to spend them on the short term and get a power-up guaranteed to you from the start of the next run? There's lots of options here and lots of ways you can spend your currency, and you should, because it's gone the moment you start your next run. There's a few great things to unlocking stuff between runs as well, because these power-ups are a permanent sense of choice that you can have. You can turn them off whenever you want, and you're given multiple options as to what you want to unlock per run, based on how much money you've acquired. Likewise, it constantly is a source of reward for the player. It's fun to find new stuff and test it out and see how it interacts with whatever character build you're trying to run with, and how it's going to work beneficially for you as a player. Plus, getting new stuff is always great. But it also creates a fun sense of progression. This is a roguelike game, and after every run you are basically effectively brought back to zero, but by constantly unlocking stuff, it does give you a sense of progression and satisfaction as you play through the game. It is fantastic. This is a great system, as it allows you to quantify some form of progress and achievement. Everything from the start to the end of a singular run is all about choice and customization, aside from what stage you start on. And I really appreciate that. It's the whole customized experience that really hits home just how much they got the core of what makes a Mega Man game work. That said, I think this game's greatest strength, that is its biggest selling point, is also kind of its greatest weakness. At least for me. Full disclosure, I don't really like randomized stuff too much. In fact, I can reliably, actively measure my engagement with these kind of games. The best way I can explain that is I love the core idea of randomized and procedurally generated stuff. The idea of the infinite game that will always throw something new at you and can go on forever is amazing. Now, of course, that's not how that works. Unless the game is actively creating assets on the fly, it can't do that. It has to grab them from a pool of things that have been pre-made for it and then just slap them in a different order every single time. And the thing is, I can measure my engagement based on the moment I start to the moment I've seen something already. For me, it's almost sort of like a binary function in my brain. One minute I'm completely enjoying this game, I'm totally immersed, and then suddenly I'll see something that I've already seen before. And then I feel like the entire illusion that the game has for how much content it actually has just kind of shatters. And from that point on, I'm no longer Ace or Nina going through these infinite dungeons and infinite stages trying to find my way through under a certain period of time and defeat these robots. Suddenly, I'm just someone playing a game trying to find mechanically the fastest way to get through this because I've already experienced it and therefore I already know how to do that. It just becomes rote mechanical autonomy in my brain and it's just not as fun. And unfortunately, it hit that threshold very, very quickly. I started running into stage layouts that were very similar to one another within about 40 minutes of play, which is real quick. And because the game is utilizing randomly generated stuff as opposed to creating completely bespoke environments, it feels like it's lacking that human touch that adds more intricacy for the layout in general. It feels artificial in that regard, and it feels lacking in secrets, it feels lacking in interesting layout, and sometimes it can just throw really bad layouts at you. For example, I ran into this moment where I had this vertical descent. It was just a very thin corridor. I had to either slide down a wall or jump down. It spawned like 3 flying enemies in there at one point, and I just had to wait for them to leave or take a bunch of damage, but either way, something was gonna have to give. I was either gonna run out of time or I was gonna run out of health, and that wasn't very fun. However, there is one thing that I really do enjoy about the randomization and the fact that the stage order isn't entirely within your hands, and that is any stage can be level 1, any stage can be level 8, and they had to find a way to get the randomizer to sort of balance that for difficulty, and it seems like they really have in a pretty meaningful way. A lot of it more seems to be on the boss end of things. If you challenge one boss as stage 1, they'll be substantially easier than if you challenge them at stage 8. I remember fighting this sort of jungle flower boss, and on stage 1 all he does is sort of teleport around and you just have to attack him before he shoots thorns at you. On the higher variations of this, there are acid pits at the bottom of the stage that you can't jump into, and there's like platforms that appear and disappear like Yoku blocks where you just have to take him out before falling into the pits themselves. It becomes a lot more challenging, even though it is effectively the same boss. So it does feel like they've found a way to balance every stage as being both stage 1 and stage 8, and that is very impressive. There are some interesting quirks about how the stages are developed. Occasionally you'll get layouts where there's sort of multiple paths through certain areas. I remember I ended up in like this weird area where I could like go through a straight corridor to the right, or I could try and like ascend a vertical shaft, or I managed to sort of slip outside the boxes of the stage and just sort of climb it from the outside. I have no idea if that was intentional, but I really just liked being able to explore things like that. Unfortunately, the stages aren't always open like that. In fact, they're very rarely open like that. But it was fun to see the stages kind of open up sometimes and give you multiple paths and routes, each which might have had different power-ups available to it and different rewards and challenges. That's pretty cool. Another really cool thing is there are some rare events. I believe the first time I played this, I found like this weird hidden room that gave me like this super amazing high-powered power-up, and I just didn't see another one for about 6 hours. It was interesting, it was weird, and I almost wondered, like, did that actually happen? Did I find some secret room that had like some kind of super-powered glitch power-up or something? But yeah, no, there's just sometimes some rare events that happen. It's kind of a shame that so much of this game gets reutilized so quickly, but there are like hidden secret things if you stick around with the mundanity of it sometimes. I feel like the rare things could be a little bit more common, the common things could be a little bit more rare, and then suddenly everything becomes a bit more of a surprise. The balancing's just a teensy bit off. It's also worth noting that whether or not you play as Ace or Nina, there are a lot of weapons in this game, and not just the Robot Master ones. There are multiple standard busters and swords that you can utilize that will play completely differently. I was playing as Ace and suddenly I swapped my sword out for a lance that did absolutely nothing for me because while it had a much further away hitbox and it gave me some room to breathe, it was a very, very stiff weapon with an awkward hitbox that just didn't gel with me. Later on, I found something that was basically a laser feather duster, and you basically had to stand inside your opponent to hit with it, but it did so much damage so fast, it instantly became my favorite weapon because it was such a risky play, but it was just so exciting to use it well. Even if you don't like guns or swords, there's probably a weapon in here if you're willing to look for it, and that's hugely encouraging. As well as an ever-expanding list of power-ups that you will be unlocking between playthroughs, as well as mechanics that you unlock with your currency, this game has a lot going for it in terms of creating some interesting experiences, based entirely on what your playstyle is. I also really appreciated that while there are spikes in this game, they're not instant death. They'll actually just sort of respawn you on the last place you had a solid foothold, and that's really encouraging. That makes this game infinitely more approachable if you're brand new to Mega Man style games. It's a very, very forgiving game, at least initially. However, I will say that the death pits and spikes get a little bit abused on the later levels, like seriously the Wily stage after you clear all of the Robot Masters, so to speak. While it does mix all the obstacles and enemies from the previous stages to create a sort of final gauntlet challenge, which I absolutely love, it's all over one giant pit, and while the pits don't instant kill you, it just seems like a really cheap way to try and create more challenge. There's not even really a stage so much as there's a couple floating platforms, a bunch of obstacles, and just a giant pit to fall into. And that to me comes across as just a really lazy way to try and create something challenging. I did not engage at all with these post-Robot Master stages. They just weren't for me, and I didn't find them fun at all. The overall presentation to 20XX is decent enough. Visually, it's a bit of a mixed bag. I think that the individual enemies and characters look great, although I will say that your main characters animate fairly stiffly, and I didn't necessarily like that all that much. And every single stage has its own unique obstacles, enemies, and that's really appreciated to give each stage sort of a unique feel. Although I feel like the actual tile sets for the environments themselves are fairly bland and unremarkable. There just wasn't too much visually to engage me with the actual stage layouts themselves. One thing I did really like, however, was the fact that every single Robot Master was based off standard enemy you were fighting. They were bigger, they were badder, but they were kind of more or less the same thing. Like in the jungle area, there's lots of little flowers that will shoot little spikes at you, and the boss of that one is a giant one that will fill the room with spikes. It took me a while to even pick up on that, but it was such a little touch that kind of hit me as, oh yeah, these must be like super prototypes for these guys. That's neat. I like that. That's sort of in-universe lore, and I like that a lot. The audio is likewise, it's fine, but I don't honestly think all of that is too memorable. I don't think the presentation of 20XX is all that amazing, but it works for what it needs to do. Now, if you want a copy of 20XX on Steam, it is currently selling full price at $17, which is not too bad. And I really appreciate someone sending this to me so that I could get my Mega Man on when I didn't have Mega Man available to me. This is a fun little game. I think its biggest issue, however, is the stage layouts for the randomizer. There's just something there that lacks the human touch that makes the stages particularly interesting and engaging, and the moment you start seeing repeated stuff, at least if you're like me, it's going to pull you out of the experience immediately. But the amount of choice and risk versus reward over the course of the entire game, both on the macro and micro scale, does make this game absolutely an engaging Mega Man style experience. And it's a lot of fun. There's lots to unlock and buy to change up your future endeavors in this game, but I don't necessarily recommend it, which might be a little paradoxical, but the fact is, there's a sequel to this out there, and it's got a full-on Mega Man conversion mod to it that's still being updated today with more and more stuff. And it looks absolutely amazing, and at some point I'm gonna have to actually play that. But 20XX on its own is a pretty decent game. If you're not a fan of randomizers, this probably isn't going to change that in any way, but if you want a new, different style of Mega Man game that's pretty affordable, this one's pretty cool and it offers you a lot of choice in your experience. I definitely think it's a fun, new take on the Mega Man formula. We may have not done a great job there. Oops.